T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Kush'S Korner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Tonight I have on Brooke Elder, and not only is she my girlfriend, but she has a long history of experience in this hobby with a very diverse background in many different facets of the hobby, and she works and breeds with lots of incredible species. We will get into all that in a minute, but before that, as always, USARK. So for those of you who do not know, USARK is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, and to pursue this way of life. Check out usark.org for all the relevant information you need to know about USARK. And if you are not already, please look into becoming a member. As a community, we have strength in numbers, and the more people that are behind the cause of USARK, the better. And we are brought to you by Focus Cube Habitats. Focus Cube Habitats is pushing the bounds of the PVC enclosure game here in the United States. If you are in the market for some of the nicest designer PVC enclosures and racks in the United States, fully customizable, pardon me, check out Focus Cube Habitats based out of Texas, my newfound home state. So definitely some Texas pride there. So as always, check out Focus Cube Habitats. We're also brought to you by Blake's Exotic Feeders. If you are here in the United States and are looking for quail to feed to your reptiles, check out Blake's Exotic Feeders. They hand raise everything at their facility in Florida, so you know you are getting a high quality product from a US-based source. Again, check out Blake's Exotic Feeders for your feeder quail needs. And last but not least, we are brought to you by Brian Susan of SUNDOWN Reptiles. He is one of the leaders in the US in the rare gecko game, tree monitors, abronia, green tree pythons. He has a very diverse collection and one of the best professional breeders in the industry, in my personal opinion. So check out SUNDOWN Reptiles on all forms of social media. Check out his website if any of those species interest you. And here we are. We are in a bit of a different setting tonight. We are in the typical studio that you would see for Trap Talk or All in the Tree Tuesday or for New Breeder on the Block. We're here at the Trap in San Diego, and we'd like to thank MJ for hosting us this evening. But with that said, again, I guess before we get going, shout out to everybody who is in the live chat already. We appreciate everybody. But Brooke, thank you for joining me tonight. How have you been doing?
I've been doing good.
Good. So for everybody who is not already familiar with you, give them a little bit of a rundown of how you got into the industry and what drew you towards reptiles and this interest to begin with.
So for people who don't know me, my name is Brooke, obviously, and my Instagram is Bo Lizard on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. And what got me started into reptiles was when I was 12 years old, I started at a fish store. And when I started, I decided to go and branch into other things. So I got into a few different reptiles. I got into knoll and something else.
Our sound guy is intruding on the podcast. He was told to be quiet.
So I started with fish, and then when fish kind of weren't doing it for me anymore, I started into a few different reptiles. When I was 16 years old, I started at a reptile and pet store in Wisconsin. Okay. And I started messing with just a few different things, and I brought home a carpet python. So that's what kind of got me into snakes, needless to say, just because I've always found arboreal pythons fascinating when I saw them in the zoo growing up. And I think when I first got to work with one, and it was a Iranjaya carpet python. It was love at first sight for me.
Mhm.
So after I had that, I took a break for a few years, and then got a tegu a couple years later. He ended up coming to college with me.
Okay.
In the in between, I also did dog training, which I think branched me into other big lizards, just due to the training aspect and how their brains work and animal behavior overall. So that kind of branched me into working more with the bigger lizards, outside of just having my tegu. My friend growing up, Dan Thomas, started a pet shop in McWanago, Animal House. And when I was free in college on like my free time, I would help him out in his store. And then when I graduated college, I actually started there full time, and I managed his pet store and helped him basically like his right hand, and took care of everything with the imports, the customers, and everything. So that's when I started diving into like the diverse species. Like we talked with the Abronia. I worked with a bunch of different lizard species. So like the Caphotis, the pygmy Sri Lankan species lizards, they're really tiny guys. I worked with a bunch of different like chameleon species from Madagascar and stuff. Just different geckos like Odura. We worked with Diplodactylus, which are the little African helmeted geckos. And then it was just a bunch of just random different species. And I dove really deep into frilled dragons. I actually bred those once, Australian locality. And I think they're phenomenal. Just due to us moving, I had to, separate with the group. But I do think that was like what kind of got me kickstarted into wanting to breed stuff for sure.
Okay. Yeah, definitely not the typical story, in a good way, I think. It's cool to have that different perspective, but to kind of bring it back. So a carpet python being your first snake, that's not a typical story. Was there a reason why you decided carpet python over ball python, corn snake, a more typical starter species?
So yeah, I think that falls back into my dog training and just dealing with the more difficult animals. I always like stuff with kind of an attitude or something that I had to learn how it spoke its language. And so having something that gave me a little bit of a challenge, and when we got her into the pet store, she, was a little defensive and she was going at people. So it was something for me to tame that snake down to sell her eventually. Little did I know she would be sold to me at the time. But I think just that was a relationship where I was like, the snake's misunderstood. The snake isn't defensive because it's evil. Like some people perceive the different arboreals to be sometimes when they are defensive, or they're just not used to being kept by a kind hand. So I think just working through that, it made me develop a new respect for snakes overall. Not that I didn't respect ball pythons and corn snakes and all of those others. They just didn't get me excited as like the first time I saw a snake or a certain species. And that's something, especially as I've evolved as a keeper, I've always taken a step back and said, if this doesn't get me as excited as the first day that I laid eyes on it, then it should belong with someone else that gets that excited, because I'm not the person for it, obviously. Not that I don't love it and I don't take care of it until I find it, that right person. Right, for sure. But it's just one of those things where you have to be able to get super excited about that animal so you can continue that passion with them.
Yeah, I think that's a point that a lot of new keepers should really hear, because there's probably 5 to 10 species of reptile that are considered the starter. But, with that said, I mean, that calling something a starter animal kind of has a connotation of like something being disposable. Like, this is what I'm going to start with. It's like, this is my starter car. It's got 150,000 miles on it. And, it's going to be in a junkyard in 2 years. But if I crash it, my parents don't lose that much money. But I guess for newer keepers, what would you really emphasize as far as like that approach that you took of kind of looking outside the box a little bit?
I would say that it's important to do you know, your own research with like going to certain stores or going to expos and getting the hands-on experience with different stuff, even if breeders won't let you hold it, you know, there might be some that will, but it's just like when you get your hands on something or an animal, or you get to have that hands-on experience, I feel like you can connect and feel, as hippie as it is, their energy, and you can see if it matches yours.
Sure.
And if you don't take that time to do it and you're listening to, you know, just a book or what someone else is saying on a podcast or wherever online, I think it can sway an opinion when, because if you read about green trees, you'll read that they're really defensive, but then you don't read the really cool stories about how they can have really good connections with their keepers and how you can go in and grab them off their perches and they're completely calm. So I think it is just getting to know individual animals, but also taking that time. But I would also say, I hope I don't get canceled for this, but I really believe that if you are unhappy with a species because you've taken it on and you thought it was something that you should have, that you should be able to rehome it to the next person that gets excited.
Sure.
Because even if that animal lives 40 some years, you know, they can bond with another keeper. They're quite different than, you know, dogs or certain animals that bond with their owner and have that emotional connection to a degree. I don't think snakes don't connect with their keepers, because I do think that they feel, you know, certain calmness with people who are
definitely
around them and know what they're doing. So you're going to have a better reaction or interaction with that animal. So with that being said, though, I still think that they can be put home to home and still live a very, very good life.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that just comes down to the quality of where they're going, as the same as the quality with the first keeper.
And I think if you take that time to find them a good home, then there's nothing really against that. But I feel like that's the biggest thing, is like variety and trying new things and going out and seeing new things and not being afraid to do that, not feeling like you're leaving your ball python behind, because that it closes so many doors.
Yeah. So how do you think that experience in a pet store when you were so young influenced? Did you think it had an influence on that mindset, or do you think you just had that already?
Yeah, I think it kind of influenced it to a degree. I mean, especially when I worked at Animal House, because it was a constant flow of so many different species, and I always had to learn new information, and I love learning new information. So that's what would get me excited about the new species, and then I would dive into that rabbit hole. So I think it was like learning like control too, because there's so many cool reptiles.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I wish I had unlimited space and time and funds, because I would have a whole zoo, but it is just that opportunity, like I said, that hands-on experience to learn different things, learn how they tick, learn their different behaviors. I think that just made all of the difference when it came from me, you know, getting my collection that I have now.
Sure.
And I think more people should be open to doing that than like ridiculing someone because they've had something for 2 months and then they decide it's not for them.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, unless you're working in a pet store or at an import facility or a zoo or something, you're not going to have the ability to actually figure that out if it's not hands-on. So no, I think people who turn over animals and, you know, aren't particular with where those go, and, you know, I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do it.
Yeah, within reason, I should say.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So I want to talk a bit about your time at Animal House, because I mean, just from our conversations, it's been very interesting. So it was a pet store, but not in a typical sense of typical pet store animals.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had to throw a rough guess at it, I mean, how many different species did you encounter working at Animal House in the time you did? Because for anyone who's been to like Tinley Park or probably Schaumburg, they were in like the back corner, and like just species that most people probably don't even know exist. I didn't know a number of them existed. And you know, before I knew anything about the place, I'm like, these all seem to be in pretty solid shape, considering, I mean, like in a good way, considering that there are probably 100 species on that table. So what was, I mean, let's just start with the very broad question of what was that experience like?
It was amazing. I feel like that's what pushed me into the reptile community further, and that's what led me to my internship at the Milwaukee Zoo and opened those different doors for me because I had those experiences. It was not like your typical pet store, like you said. It was basically an import facility as well, and I worked with probably, like 300 to 500 different species. I mean, it was within the 4 years that I helped out or knew Dan, I learned so much, and it was amazing. But it's hard at times too, because when you get a lot of new species and you don't know how to take care of it, and you gotta learn really quick, and you have trial and error, and you don't know where those animals have always, or how long they have been at other import facilities, what those facilities are like, what treatment they go through, and they don't go through good treatment when they're originally being caught and sent over, the wild caught stuff at least. So there's stuff like that where you just have to learn all of these different things, and you have to take stuff to the vet. Sometimes you have to learn new things, learn different medications, learn how to give animals different injections, medications. So it was a lot to learn, but it was a lot of fun. It was like going through kind of small scale vet tech school without actually having to do it, just because I was taking different stuff when we could. So it was definitely, it opened my eyes to how many different reptiles there really can be, besides when I went to Tinley and saw different, ball pythons, carpet breeders, and nothing like wrong with that. It was just, I definitely am a lizard person from my Instagram name, if you don't get that. But I think all of the different lizard species, it's incredible.
Yeah. So from just a functional day-to-day standpoint, how much of the business you guys were doing was like in-store customers in person compared to online sales and shipping? Because you have to assume in whatever the fuck name Wisconsin, there probably aren't a ton of people who don't know about who want these super rare obscure reptile species. So what was the balance there?
So we did do shipping, and I remember at our peak, we would just send out 20 boxes a day, and we'd have to schedule a pickup from FedEx, and they'd come and pick them up, and we'd get them all ready. So that was a part of my job on top of helping customers throughout the day. So that was very interesting, but it was what held us together, especially during COVID when everything closed and people weren't able to go to stores. They were able to get reptiles shipped to them. And I think people, when they got their stimulus checks and everything like that, what better to do than go online and buy reptiles? And that's when Dan invested a lot of time into building out the website. And then I worked the website, taking photos constantly. I was a hand model with all these different reptiles, because as soon as we were, getting the captive bred ones or the farm raised ones that were healthy, they were, online. They were ready to go out to people. The imports and certain stuff like that, obviously, they were held for the amount of time that they needed, or needed treatment, whatever they needed. But it was a very fast paced facility, and it was so small because it was in a strip mall in McGuanago. So it wasn't a big facility by any means. What saved us is we had a basement. So all of our animals and our overflow could be in the basement. And we had a huge tortoise pen down there. So we had different species of tortoise come through, and that was pretty cool too. I got to work with pancakes and a bunch of redfoots, Russians, Hermans, Greeks. So they're typical, but it was cool to be able to, work with as many different species as I did at the time. Because you got to see just different behaviors from all of the different species. Yeah,
for sure. So from a standpoint of establishing a recently imported animal, which you had to do quite a lot there, what was your approach? You get a shipment of, I don't know, this is a Guyana shipment. There's a bunch of different snakes in there. What was your step-by-step to getting these animals settled in, treated, and then ready to go on to their next homes?
Oh, it was always so much cleaning and so much fun. But it was always I would get the list from Dan, and then I would prep tubs, soaking tubs. I would prep the nicks, whatever I had to prepare for the animals coming in. Parasite treatment and anything like that was going to be weeks down the road once you got fecals and everything. I never did at least I don't know any pet store really that would take every single animal to the vet to get fecals and tests done. But what we did was we would keep the animal on paper towel, watch fecals. If anything were to persist or the fecal looked watery or anything atypical, then we would treat it as needed. But otherwise, yeah, not much had to be done with that right away. But it was just soaking things. I remember when we got like a blue tree monitor shipment, I had to pull like 100 ticks off of one with
Fuck
Dan.
Yeah.
That was so much fun. So I definitely would have little oddballs here and there, but majority was just getting stuff hydrated and then getting it into a place where it could be stress free and decompress, because just depending on where we got it from, like if they were thrown in snake bags and shipped over, I know or like pillowcases, they probably weren't, treated as best as like the farm raised ones or captive hatch ones that were sent in the nice deli cups and padding over to us for sure.
Sure. And Brett, thank you for joining us late. We actually can start over. So everyone, for Brett Bender, we're going to start over the episode. Hey everyone, welcome to the okay. Thank you for joining in, Brett. A little foreshadowing for a future Kush'S Korner episode right there. Okay, so based on your experience with all of these imported animals, what do you see are being some of like the main mistakes people make when they get an animal, let's say from an importer table at a show that's obviously a pretty recent wild caught? I think it's safe to say there's a pretty heavy failure rate with those animals. What do you see as the primary mistakes people are making when they get an animal via those circumstances?
Primary mistake is going to be hydration. People are so worried about heat all the time, and hydration is like the main killer with reptiles especially when they're stressed out. And then leave them alone.
Yeah.
Because the thing with reptiles is their cortisol, it spikes for like 24 hours. It spikes when you open their enclosure just to like change their water or do anything. So, which is not unhealthy within reason, like when you're doing your regular maintenance and stuff. But if an animal is already compromised because it has been, grabbed and mistreated and shipped over here, just in some cases, but it does happen. And so when an animal's already so stressed out and then you just keep stressing it out, you're just automatically going to send its immune system into compromise. I mean, there's no other way to really go around it. So that's why I say get that animal hydrated. And that doesn't mean throwing it in a soaking tub and making sure it gets hydrated that way, because, that's not a natural thing for a lot of these species. So for me, I mean, I try to give them even substrate sometimes, let them get substrate and humidity and hydrate that way, other than like giving them a water dish and spraying them and stuff like that. But I think even if it does result in mites in the end, because it's a wild caught animal and stuff, at least that animal's hydrated, and then you can treat it for mites. Because if you're just treating it for mites right away when an animal's already not looking too good when it's coming in, it's going to stress it out even more. So there's certain stuff where it's like 100% I'm going to get it hydrated and treated right when it comes in. But if something's was coming into me looking like it's on death's doorstep, then I'm going to just leave it alone and get it hydrated as hands off as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great message for people to hear. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think one problem that seems to persist is kind of like the shotgun treatment of everything, Panicure, Flagyl, 3 doses in a row, Prevenamite the world. Like, this animal has a compromised immune system because it's been in a bag for 2 weeks and from facility 1 to 2 to 3. And now you're just, you're taxing a system that's already very taxed. Like, for instance, we're in this room, there's a number of imported green tree pythons in here. And, in the past, MJ's had imported emerald tree boas. I think a lot of the issues that people have run into historically with those species is just that of, you get this animal and your immediate instinct is this is a sensitive species, so it needs to be rid of any of these ailments that it has. So it comes from a good place, I think, but it has an inverse reaction.
It does, and especially when it comes down to parasites. Parasites exist in everything, basically, that's living. So
you and I have parasites right now.
Yummy. So that's definitely like one of those things where I'm like, if you're going to treat it, make sure that animal is showing signs of like, hey, I need treatment, hey, I need help. Because
sure.
if you wipe out a fresh, like an animal that is fresh to you, if you just wipe out its complete digestive tract when you hit it with Panacure, or if you hit it with ivermectin and you have no idea how that species reacts to it,
Sure.
you can have an animal seizing.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things where it's like, breathe, let that animal breathe, and then go at it. But I mean, at least for 72 hours when I get a new animal, I try to do as hands off as possible. If I was having to soak stuff, I was using a hook and to drop them in, and just as hands free as possible, because they're stressed already. So to grab them, restrain them, throw them into things, it's just like, it's not needed, because they're already at that point where they've gone through a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, hundreds of species through those doors that you got your hands on. What are a handful of like the standouts for you, of the ones that after all of your time, you're like, these were the ones that I had the most fun with, my top of the top species from Animal House?
So there's a lot. I'm going to try to narrow it down. Definitely there was like some different snake species. Like we got scrub pythons in at one point. We got indigos. That's how I started getting into indigos. We worked with Australian species for a while when we were importing from Europe. And so we worked with central netted dragons, which are like a smaller bearded dragon. I believe the last part of their scientific name is Naturalis. And they're a really, really cool species. And then I worked with earless dragons. I can't remember their scientific name, but they get about like this big full grown, and they're bright red. You can keep them pretty communal as long as you keep them fed. And it was an incredible species. I worked with Rankin's dragons, which are like the smaller version of the bearded dragon. I think those are really badass, and I think more people should keep those than beardies. They actually have phenomenal temperaments too. So
cool.
That was really cool to work with those. The Pagona miners were very cool as too, though. I think that's the eastern bearded dragon. But
this is why you're here, to know these answers.
That was another dragon species I worked with besides the frill dragons that I really, really liked. And then moving on, I worked with a little bit of like different Indonesian species. So some of like the forest dragons, Coyotes, were part of like the other lizard species I liked. And then I worked with the Sri Lankan species, like I said, like the Cophotis dumbara. Those are the spiked pygmy lizards, and they're a very cool species. And then I believe they're the long-nosed dragons or leaf-nosed dragons from Sri Lanka as well. They're a really cool lizard with like a bulbous nose, and I think they can actually kind of move it a little bit, if I remember.
Cool.
And then let's see. I like the Odura a lot, which are the Madagascar velvet geckos. Dan was breeding those at the store. So I got to interact with those. And then, of course, the Abronia, the Berigia, the Mesopis, all of those alligator lizards. And then I believe the Texas one is the Garahantis or something like that. But the Texas alligator lizards, those are very, very cool. And I was a big fan of all of those little lizard species with the prehensile tails. Like, it's incredible. So I definitely, I like I said, I was lizard heavy in that aspect because I liked all of the Uromastics. I mean, any lizard that came in, I was a fan of. And that's when I started diving into iguanas a lot more too, because we worked with like Tenosaurus, Defensors, the Alfred Schmidti, beautiful
those.
Bright lizards.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Totally underrated. We got some Xenogamas in, those little shield-tailed lizards or something like that. They're really, really, they were just really cool and interactive, and seeing their behaviors and their head bobbing and their communication and like it was just very interesting to study all of those, different behaviors. Even when we got the toad-headed agamas in, I would sit there just like watching them because they just did the coolest little things and how they communicated with their tails. And when you spray them, they make their tail like a little trough to like drop the water down, and then they drink the water.
That's cool.
Off of them. So like just seeing behaviors like that, like unless you took that time to, you know, watch them for a little bit. I mean, you don't see those things, especially if you're just going through the daily motions type thing. So that was cool to have a job where I'm getting paid to observe like those types of behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. So how would you say your taste in reptiles, so to speak, your interests were molded by that experience?
Well, I guess I developed an expensive taste over time. Unfortunately, I blame Dan. But I dove deep into indigos and dry marcon. I got Mexican indigos. Mm-hmm. So those were, $2,000 a piece getting into those. And it's not, a cheap snake by any means, but beautiful snake and one of my favorite species, hands down. Let's not. But I definitely acquired liking some of the fancier, unique species. Unfortunately, they are more expensive. But
sure,
I'm gonna say the name totally wrong, so please don't butcher me. But it's like Yungolophus or something. The bromeliad boas from the cloud forest. That is such a wicked cool species, and I think I wish they weren't $5,000 a piece because.
They're that expensive?
Yeah.
Oh my god!
And I don't think they're going down anytime soon, unless someone else knows differently. Please let me know. But
that's wild. Wow.
They're lizard eaters too, and I set up a bioactive enclosure for the pair that we had for a while at Animal House, and I put bromeliads in there, and some were fake and some were live, but the female would actually sleep in the bromeliads, so it was cool to see them
that's cool.
do something that they're kind of named after.
Yeah.
But it sucks that the cool unique species can sometimes be more expensive, but I think with captive breeding and more people working with them and stuff, because Stropherus was a huge species that I was into, and now Brian Brian Susan, he produces a lot of them, obviously. So shout out to him. He produces a lot of wicked species. I mean, anytime I go to Tinley, even when I started and I was new, his table always stopped me because
absolutely,
incredible species.
The Sundown Reptiles table is a top table at Tinley Park.
If you don't stop at that table, you're missing out half of what's good at the show.
Seriously.
So I definitely seeing just different little species like that, and I really want to get Diplodactylus again, which are the African helmeted geckos. I just think the Galeatus, they look like they're tripping on LSD 24/7, and they just are really cool.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely a fan of those. And if I had more time and money, I would branch out into other frog species, because we worked with quite a few frog species, the mossy tree frogs, Amazon milk frogs, the crown tree frogs. There was a bunch. I'm missing a bunch, but there was a bunch of different species. I saw black-eyed tree frog, red-eyed tree frogs for the first time, and they look like they're tripping hard. It's just a black poop
that they do. They've been on Molly for a week.
No sleep. But so just seeing all of those different species, it just opened my eyes to the world of reptiles.
Yeah, sure.
At a pet store, I worked at a chain. It was there was 3 in Wisconsin. They were all Pet World, and so we had fish, birds, small mammals, and all that stuff. So we had your basics, your ball python, whatever you could get off the wholesale list at the time. So
sure.
We get green amoebas and stuff sometimes, the giant ones, and then we get your classic rose hair tarantula, orange baboon tarantula, and then your pink toes and stuff like that.
Sure.
So it's nothing crazy. And then so I feel you just don't get to know all of those different species
for sure.
unless you are working at that scale. But I don't think every pet store should work at that scale, because as cool as it was, there was no sleep, and I got no sleep, and I'm sure Dan got none. I know he slept at the pet store sometimes on a dog bed, Chance's dog bed. So, there was nights where it was nonstop, because when you have that many species, we're bringing them in, we're taking care of them.
Right.
You're not going home until, they're taken care of. Especially for me, I love animals. So it's one of those things where you can't really just put it on the back burner.
Sure.
Especially when all those animals are depending on you.
Yeah. How do you possibly balance the husbandry needs of so many different species and so many sensitive species like tree frogs and, the bromeliad boas, bronia, I can't even really start to picture how one keeps all the parameters in order?
So the nice thing is Dan actually built a room that was kind of geared to like the Odura and like some other species that could get along in there.
Okay.
And then we were also able to cool it at one point enough for the Sri Lankan species. So we were able to really move parameters in this smaller room, which helped at points. But it was difficult. I feel like we had our tropical room that could sometimes be cooler temps, and then we had our arid hot room. And that was like with your Euromastics, those Australian species I was saying, and like your Tenosauras and your different, agamids that liked it hot.
Was that in the basement then?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had like rooms partitioned off downstairs. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then upstairs was like our show floor, so we would just have like our cages up there. But it was very like basic. Like everything had like hides and coverage and stuff like that. But it was like we would go and get cypress from like the greenhouse in bulk. Because there's really no point in doing that bioactive soil and going through like all of those things for a new species.
For sure. I mean, especially that thing's going to be in a cage for a month maybe, or even less sometimes.
Well, yeah, and like sometimes you're going to have to move those animals around the next day. Like, so it's just like one of those things where it's like if stuff is constantly moving, like you don't want to get that all set up because you don't want to cross-contaminate. You want to keep it as clean as possible. And I feel like like having a good cleaner too, like, the rescue we use at the house, like that, it's a lifesaver.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and especially considering you guys have so many freshly imported species there, if you were, not that one should do this, but if you like were buying wholesale from one ball python breeder and that was your pet store, you could probably get away with not changing out enclosures, even though I would. But like wild caught animal from Indonesia, a few weeks later, wild caught animal from Suriname, then wild caught animal from Middle East or North Africa, like the gut fauna and the potential parasites that could be coming across, that could
it could wipe out
be
species.
very detrimental to something that's not familiar at all with that.
Exactly. And when we brought in some stuff, we brought in some yellow fungus and a adenovirus one time at the facility, and it was scary as heck.
Yeah.
We got everything quarantined. We got everything tested. Like we did what you needed to do.
Yeah, sure.
And it was expensive, and like,
I bet.
That's what you do, especially when you're a reputable like store in place in person, and you care about those things. Like you make sure everything's good, and we definitely did. It was just one of those things where it was just like you had to stop everything and drop everything to make sure you quarantine that, because other species, if they get that, it's very detrimental. I mean, some of the animals, they don't start showing until like signs of stress like take over the body, and then it starts compromising the immune system and everything like that. But it was insane when I did like tests on them and stuff, because I was learning about how to trigger adenovirus to identify it and like the different stressors, and like some of them it was just putting them in water.
Oh, really?
And they would start to spin, and then their heads would tilt, and you could see that they had the neurological thing. But then there were others where it's like, it wasn't unless I like pinched them or poked them or like got them like super upset that they would start showing. And as soon as they started showing me signs, like I could separate them and stuff. And then I knew which ones to test on top of, like, to just keep compressing it until we had it all centered, basically.
I mean, that's invaluable information to be able to, put together. Especially with an operation like that. I mean, all of us keepers inevitably have come across viruses or bacteria or whatnot, but doing that type of importing work where you're bringing animals through and, you're increasing that likelihood exponentially compared to what a typical keeper or breeder would experience. And
I think a lot of people, not a lot of people, but there are like those hidden people that don't have fully disclosed what's going on in their collections, and that's where the messes can happen. And I think 100%. Being honest about things to keep other people's collections safe and keep these animals safe, like I rather keep an entire house safe of reptiles than make it $300 off of someone, right? And like I think that's what people need to like look at, is like the harm it does in the long run. And as long as you're being responsible and doing these things with importing animals, it's completely normal and it's completely fine. And And I'm a huge, person for wild caught, because I think without it, we don't have the gene pool that we have.
Oh yeah.
And if we don't continue
Absolutely.
good lineage with certain things, I mean, bearded dragons are they're cool in their own way, and I think they're for certain keepers. But if we could have fresh genetics from bearded dragons, I mean, imagine.
Yeah, I mean, wild bearded dragons compared to U.S. bearded dragons are they're not the same. Yeah.
And that's where it's just like being able to bring in different strong genetics, because that's a thing too. When an animal survives in captivity after being brought out of the wild, you have superior genetics there. I mean, that thing survived a lot.
Yeah,
and the ones that don't make it, I mean, not to say they wouldn't have made it in the wild, but I'm just saying that animal is bomb proof.
Yeah.
And to me,
fair enough.
If you want a good breeder, that's what you should do. And now if you want a pet, completely different. But if you were to get into a breeding aspect, I think you shouldn't overlook, wild caughts to a degree, unless you are looking for something you can handle easy and be, it depends on the animal size and what safety measures and all that stuff.
Definitely, it depends on the species as well, because, like for instance, to go back to this room with green tree pythons, green tree pythons have been bred for decades, and there's been meticulous notes kept by the breeders over the years. So to have a genetically strong and diverse collection of green tree pythons is a very attainable thing within the context of the U.S. hobby. But that's probably like the best example of that. Whereas if, like with those Sri Lankan pygmy lizards, for instance, you can go to Justin Munsterman, or that's it. Yeah, shout out to Justin for breeding those so well.
All of the stuff he got from Animal House, he kills it.
Yeah,
I mean, you couldn't ask for those species to end up in better hands. Like,
yeah,
I mean, you just know with someone like that, they're gonna go above and beyond and keep that species going, and that's what we want in captivity.
Yeah,
I mean, captive breeding isn't always, and in the sense that we're gonna let that species go. It's just because like those species don't even have places to go in their natural habitat sometimes. So I think that's another thing we need to focus on is captive breeding, just for the preservation of certain species, really cool species like that.
Yeah. And, even just for the standpoint of people being able to see these animals, because I my opinion on the whole conservation through captive propagation thing, it's definitely, it's a thing, but it can be over exaggerated. And I often think it's because people have kind of like they're morally, they're not so sure how to feel about it.
Yeah.
So they try to convince themselves they're doing some virtuous thing by running this narrative far past the extent to where it needs to be. And
you don't need to dock like the people that are actually doing it, the accredited like places that are serving the species, like the Blue Iguana Conservation, and then the Florida Center for Indigos. Like those people are legit,
right?
But the other people that are going to a reptile show and buying something and being like, I'm helping with this, it's like that's where you need to find the education on it.
There's levels to it, and I mean, I'm glad you said that, because I'm not talking about actual legitimate conservation initiatives that are doing real work. But if anything, the way that I see it, the real way that we save these animals in the wild is by making people aware that they even exist. Because there's so many species cool. and exactly. Like if we're just looking at reptiles, there's so many reptile species that we don't even know exist. Nonetheless, somebody who's not even involved in the hobby.
That's why I follow like a lot of wildlife photographers and just people who go into the fields and stuff, because I think it is just like that preserves the species overall too, because it's like, oh, this is where this is from. This is like, I mean, it's cool to see animals in their native habitat rather than like at a zoo. Like, even though like San Diego Zoo is beautiful, like some zoos exhibits are
there's
absolutely
some incredible
beautiful.
Zoos out there for sure.
But it's just like one of those things where you want to be able to appreciate that animal in its essence, and like you only get that when it's in the wild like that.
There's definitely something different, and that's why on this show I always like to try to preach the virtues of field herping, I think that for me, and we can get into your experience with it too. I got into field herping well into my reptile career. It didn't help that I grew up in the city of Chicago, where our best herps are squirrels and pigeons. um, but just being able to, even if it's a local species to you, not even something that you have to go travel for, it brings into perspective, what these animals do actually experience in real life. And also, to me, it gave me perspective on how hardy reptiles truly are, because you're there, you're experiencing it. They don't have heat lights and heat tape in their dens. Like, this is harsh, and it's just how it goes. So what's, to bring it back to you so I don't take up all your airtime, what role has herping played in your reptile experience?
I think herping definitely pushed me away from breeding as much as I did. Not that I have anything against breeding. Like, I love breeding what I breed, and I think breeders are needed, obviously. But I think seeing those animals in like their natural habitat and how they can cruise and get away and just live their life, like it's awesome to see how they can choose to thermoregulate and do those certain things that you just don't always see unless you do give them a huge exhibit. I mean, I feel like the only place where I've really seen naturalistic behaviors happen a whole lot is Reptilandia with Ari and Ryu and Quetzal. I mean, I think that's the only time you can see those behaviors without seeing those animals in the wild. And
absolutely,
to do that in your house or a facility, that's very hard to do. So I think that gave me like more of a sensitivity for it, because to see animals in their natural habitat just jive in and doing their thing, it's so beautiful. I feel like it gives you a whole new appreciation for reptiles as well, because they're so resilient and they just persevere over habitat loss, any changes. I think more than any other species, like other animals out there, I think they handle it a lot better. So just the evolution of them overall, and to see them in the different micro habitats all over, it's super impressive. Even like arachnids, because I like my inverts too. But seeing just all the different places they inhabit, it's really cool to see. Because people like try to give you like a cookie cutter explanation for how to like keep something sometimes, and I think that's really lame, because when you see a lot of these species, like reticulated pythons, for example, the amount of ground they cover in their different microhabitats, it's insane. So to be like, this animal needs this, and you can't change any of that, it doesn't make sense to me, because that animal literally gets to choose where it lives in the wild.
For sure. It definitely, it gives you that perspective that husbandry does not have to be cut and dry, like you were saying. And I think for anybody who keeps U.S. native species, if you have the time, it's worth your time to go experience those animals in the wild. I know for me personally, I have a decent sized rattlesnake collection, and before living where these snakes come from, I would take trips out to New Mexico, and it just gave me a different perspective. Sleeping out in the mountains at night, like, oh my God, it is freezing out here right now. Like, if the room gets too cold at night, the only reason anything goes wrong is because an animal's unhealthy. And likewise in the day, it's like, all right, this animal is, experiencing the 40s at night, but if it's out on the rocks, it's going to be basking at 120 degrees. Like, okay, well, it's probably something that animal is going to avoid. So then what is it doing during that period of the day? Just, it gives you a lot more perspective and appreciation for the truth of, of how those animals exist, and how because you can and can't relate it to captivity sometimes. If I were to set up my banded rock rattlesnakes, how they come from, their cages would just be floor to ceiling piled rocks with some dirt on the bottom, and you would never be able to see them. You couldn't track their feeding. It would be terrible. It would suck. You'd never see your animals. But that,
I think with certain established species too, once you have them for a while too, I think that helps with all of that, because once an animal knows its enclosure or its parameters, I feel like they become more active depending on that as well. When an animal's like
Sure.
newer or it gets that change, it's just like, what the heck is going on? But then it'll develop that pathway of where it needs to go. And I think a big thing too, at least what I've noticed, is like being particular about where you put your basking spots or where you have your temps or your parameters. If you keep your whole cage warm, you're not going to see your animal that much. Where if you have to make them work to get that heat, you're going to see them in that basking spot every day at this amount of time, because that's the only spot they have to get that hot.
Yeah.
And when you're doing like heat tape or stuff like that, it can be difficult to achieve those things because you're not creating that micro habitat that they do, have in the wild.
Yeah.
It's not going to be always 76 ambient or 80 ambient wherever that lizard is.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so to kind of bring it back around to kind of close out the whole pet store topic, the one thing that many of us don't get to experience that you did with that line of work is dealing with customers face to face. How was that? How did you have fun dealing with your
I mean, if I didn't learn patience from dog training, I definitely learned it from customer service, because people can be pretty brutal on customer service, especially even if I wasn't the one dealing with them. Hi, Antoine. But it definitely, it taught me a lot. It matured me, because I had to deal with angry people a lot, and just because they would get upset about like there was crazy stuff. Like I would have people buy a snake in the winter and leave it in their car, but then it was my fault. So it would be stuff like that where I was just like, this is an impossible situation, but I don't want to lose a customer, and I want to educate that person too, like without like belittling them. I feel like a lot of people just get fed up with people, so then they just start getting angry, and you really want to educate people in a kinder way. Like, don't get me wrong, people did piss me off, and if you called me a certain name or something, like I would definitely hang up. But like I think educating customers is super important, but also having kind of like the preconceived like idea that like they're so excited for that pet that it's going in one ear and out the other. So that person's going to be coming back to you multiple times. So that's why it's so important to be kind to them that first time to build that relationship. Like, they're going to annoy the heck out of you, but I feel like Dan taught me this, especially like they come for their feeders, they come for everything else, and then they tell their friends because you're kind. And even if they're asking you 100 questions, even though you answered those questions multiple times, you just have to push through that, because I mean, I always look at it too as like I started somewhere. We all started somewhere.
Right.
We all asked questions to someone, and someone gave us time, so we learned more. And if that one person doesn't give you time, that like chain effect doesn't happen. And like both of us, we wouldn't be where we are or doing what we're doing if certain people didn't talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that mindset can be attributed to everything. I mean, social media is a big one. It's really easy to disregard a message somebody sends you, or someone's asking you a question about an animal they bought from somebody else, and you're just like, go ask them. But I think that in the long run, even from like a personal gain standpoint, not that it's good to look at things from that way, but I think that there's a lot that one can accomplish from having that mindset of
especially if you're trying to be a breeder, though, like it is important. Like you want to build that sense of community, because like those people are going to get you your new customers too, especially if someone's, not on MORPH Market or your social media or something, like when you don't have that knowledge of where to get certain things, like your name isn't going to be brought up. So if you are nice to every single person that comes through the door that day or sees you at your table, I feel like you're going to at least get half of them remembering something, and they'll come back. That was a huge thing at Tinley Park. Like, even though we were in Chicago, people drove, because they would come from Wisconsin to go to that show. They would come back to our pet store that day and buy setups, buy what they needed, buy the food. So, I mean, that's important to have that, that patience for people. And I think desensitizing yourself to the point where like animals will get neglected, animals will get forgotten about, because at the end of the day, people will buy animals for their children and then they don't want to take care of it, and it's just going to happen. And now we should still educate people and we should still take the time, but it's never going to be gone. So to be bitter about it and be like, just write people off because of it, I don't think that's the way either, obviously. But I stepped out of a pet store, you know, setting because it wasn't the setting for me anymore. I had my time. I did my thing. And I went back to a pet store after I worked at the zoo, and I knew like right away that's not what I wanted to do. And it's not that I didn't want to educate people anymore, but I wanted to do it in a different way. And that's why I turned to my social media more, because I'm kind of a hermit, and as you know.
Well, it's a great way to transition into the next part. So how did the zoo opportunity come up, and what was it like transitioning from a pet store to now you're working at a zoological institution? So
the zoo, it like popped up, like they were just advertising that the reptile and aquarium building was hiring an intern, and I was like, no way. And it said you just needed a college education, and I had my degree in HR, so I was like, loophole. So I ended up, you know, just applying for it, and I put all of my background starting from when I was 12 years old, working in a fish store and getting paid under the table, selling fish and stuff, like so it was just cool to use all of my experience and then throw, you know, Dan on top of it, because I was working for him at the time. So it was just able to be like, hey, this is what I've all done, and this is what I can offer you. This is what I bring to the table. Like, and I want to learn more. And I think honestly, having my background in fish, it sealed the deal. But definitely working with the various species I worked with, at Dan's, that helped solidify to that. I mean, we worked with incredible species, more species than Milwaukee had. Not that the species that Milwaukee had that weren't amazing, but I think having that knowledge I did with working with all those species already, besides like the Chinese alligators and a few venomous and stuff like that, it was that perfect lineup of I was at the right time in my life to step into something like that. And it was during the end of COVID too. So the zoo was closed for like the beginning of when I was working there. They were only open like a few hours at a time when they did start opening again. So I had an easy way to like, you know, get used to the zoo lifestyle and everything like that. And I felt like it was very beneficial to me as a keeper and as like a breeder and everything that I was trying to do at the time. Because this was before I bred frills or indigos or anything like that. This is when I helped Dan with like little species, like at Animal House here and there, and different projects like that. But I didn't dive into anything yet. I think I just had my Eurodactylotes, my chameleon geckos at the time. I breed those. Always have those. But yeah, so I think it just was, it was the perfect alignment of everything, and it got me into that stepping stone of like, because I've always liked venomous too, and I obviously still don't have any, but there's certain species, like I would like to timber rattlesnake in the future and some other things. The rhino viper, I loved the Kush'S Korners we produced at the zoo, were incredible. So
very cool.
That was, I mean, I didn't do it, but so just working with stuff like that, it solidified that like that was where I was like meant to be, like working with the animals, especially like when I developed my relationship with the turtles, with like our training sessions, and then the Cyclura lewisi at the zoo, Digger, who sparked my further interest into rhino iguanas besides or Cyclura, I should say, besides the rhino iguana that we had at Animal House. Because Dan owned a rhino iguana for quite some time, and I named him Luca. And he was a little bulldog, and I bonded with him so much that when I then ran into the opportunity to adopt, you know, Rocco in the future, I had to immediately, because I had my good relationship with Luca, and then Digger was like, he was like a cat. So I mean, anytime I'd go into his enclosure, it took me like a week to like get him used to me, just like giving him treats and stuff. But like when I'd go into his enclosure, I'd sit there for like 5 minutes after I like cleaned his stuff, and he'd come down from his like heated log and like sit on my lap, and I could scratch him. Like it was really cool to see animals just like build bonds with you like too, when they wouldn't even come near me when I first started. So
Yeah.
Penny, like she saw the fly river turtle, saw my nail polish the first week I was working, and none of the zookeepers had nail polish, so she swam away from me, and she didn't do her training session. And that happened like I think like 2 times before she was like, "Oh, you have the food now." And then we slowly built our relationship. And working with the fly river turtle was like one of the coolest things because she was so intelligent, and I taught her to spin, and I could pick her up out of the water. And like this was like a 30+ pound turtle. So,
oh wow.
It was cool to have a relationship with like an adult female fly river.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I never thought I would
absolutely.
work with something like that. And then the Amazon river turtle that I worked with in the zoo was very, very cool as well.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
very luminescent.
Damn, we got very dramatic lighting for those who are watching
This
the
is
stream.
the nighttime edition.
Yeah, exactly.
After hours.
So what were some of the challenges you faced transitioning from the?
Hi, Mike.
We got Uncle Mike in the house. What's going on? From transitioning from that pet store setting into the zoological setting, where there's a lot more protocols,
Yeah.
from and not that you didn't have protocols with the pet store, but
Well,
if
no,
it's just a few of you guys, and then you're in this place with a hierarchy and
Yeah.
egos, and
I mean, I will say the nice thing about Milwaukee Zoo was all of the keepers were very open to my knowledge of stuff that I did know.
Okay, that's good.
And it was very protocol. Like it came down to like each enclosure had its own tongs, spoon for picking up poop, and nothing could be moved, and you had a feeding chart every day. Like you had to document things every single day.
Yeah.
But it was cool because it taught you stuff. Like I think people should do like different feeding charts and stuff for certain species, especially
Sure.
if you're trying to establish something, because that does help you in the long run of trying to track things. But I also I think it's just one of those things where the zoo just teaches you to be more organized with your collection, with having a larger collection.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What do you think you took from that into your personal keeping that you didn't have
OCD.
before? Expand.
Just being very like particular about how things go and not cross-contaminating things. But it's a good thing to be
it's a great thing. Yeah.
More excessive with being clean than not, especially if you are getting in new stuff. Or like in our case, we combined 2 collections, and I think that's something people don't talk about a lot. And if there was a reptile dating site, it maybe would come up more. But
I would not want to see that site. My God, that would be a nightmare.
But I think like
it's like, are you mentally ill? Hey, I'm mentally ill.
I have all of these reptiles.
All right. Anyway, on that note.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where the zoo teaches you to be more aware of those things, and giving animals certain space and cohabit. You learn different things about cohabiting and stuff, because like I feel like when I worked at a pet store, people would like crucify you if you even talked about housing like 2 animals together and just like ate them like. But I think it just opens your eyes to the different things that can happen. I mean, still stuff can happen.
We got the branding there already, man. Brett, I'll bill me. That was incredible. Anyway.
But I think that's like, I feel like that's the biggest thing in the zoo that like it taught me was organization and how to.
I think the morph match, you probably should have quit when you're on top, Brett. But all right, sorry. All right, last interruption for the time being.
Thanks.
Liquid Death, not a sponsor. All
right. So any more questions about the zoo, or
I mean,
talk about the indigos or Rocco, or
this is my show.
Yeah, I mean,
and I'll ask the questions.
Well, the zoo thing kind of fell off. So.
The zoo thing did not fall off. We just got distracted by names of reptile specific dating sites, and we'll blame this one on Brett for being the marketing guy on
Brett.
this. And now you've thrown me off my train of thought, and now I have to fill the air until I think of another question. God, we're an hour and 4 minutes in. We're falling off the rails. But okay, so one enclosure when we were there that you showed me that was pretty interesting was the enclosure with the Asian giant softshell turtle,
Amazon River turtle.
Amazon River turtle,
Yeah.
and the arowana and stuff like that.
Yeah,
This
the arowana,
giant
the
mixed
herpema.
species,
Red-tailed
you know,
catfish.
aquatic enclosure.
Yeah, 50,000 gallon aquarium.
So, I mean, most people who are into or animals in any capacity will never experience an animal enclosure that large. I mean,
No.
what was it like being a keeper in that setting with these giant, I mean, beasts of animals that you can't see anywhere else? I mean, what's that like?
It was awesome. I mean, there's sometimes, especially when I've seen like their Pima or Arapaima, however you want to say it, on like YouTube of like knocking people out.
Yeah,
It was
these things will
insane.
fucking smack the shit out of you.
But the only experience that I ever had was like wicked, and it wasn't me who did it, but a fellow keeper was feeding them their fish, and we used like the flower pot bottoms, the plastic bottoms to put their food on. Sure. And one of them, purple or red was their names. They grabbed it and they bent it in half and spit it back out, obviously. But yeah, that was insane to see because it snapped so quickly.
Yeah.
That obviously that the amount of pressure that goes in when they inhale, it's insane. So it was definitely like one of those things where I was like, I never want to put my hand in, and I never wanted to fall in. There's
yeah, that would be bad.
There's definitely times where I was like, you don't want to psych yourself out and like fall in because of it. But it was a very impressive exhibit, but it was also like you respected all of the animals in there.
Sure.
For sure. And Onassis, the Amazon River turtle, she was the queen of the exhibit. She even bit the Herpema. Like no one messed with her. So I feel like if anyone was to cause the most problems, it was her. And I remember they would have to have a diver in there to kind of distract her and do target feeding with her because she would go after people cleaning the enclosure.
Jeez.
Just to check them out.
Jeez. Yeah, that's crazy. So to kind of segue into our next topic, to bring it back to something you were saying about the Lewisi, the Cayman rock iguana, that Grand Cayman blue rock iguana that you worked with. How did your experience with that animal prepare you for Rocco, the rhino iguana?
I think, Digger was older, so he was like 17, I think, this year. But learning the like breeding behaviors and just like the head bobbing, the communication, it helped me a lot because I really do feel like Cyclura communicate within the species. They communicate way more than people really give them credit for. They even communicate like with their eyes, like with like retracting and dilating their eyes. So based off of that, like you can tell if one of them is like agitated or upset.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I think working with Digger, I learned a lot of those behaviors from an animal that was calmer. So then when I got Rocco, who was like a spaz because he was so much younger and could move so much. Because Digger was he's a plump, well-fed boy. So he was definitely, he could come at you if he was upset and he would do all the head bobbing and the mouth shaking and stuff. But it was like, he wasn't going to put me in the hospital by any means with a bite or anything like that. Because, that's something where I don't post a lot of like bites or anything about Cyclura, but I definitely will say like when they're an adult species, especially, or have some size to them, it's like a bite you don't really want to mess with, and you want to respect that animal.
Yeah, for sure.
Like one thing I'll say is they used to have to do a restraining method at the zoo for like practice for like becoming a keeper. So you would have to learn how to restrain some of the animals, and Digger was one of them. And that actually like changed his behavior with the keepers that did that to him. I never had to do that because that training obviously ended before I started there. And I think that made a world of a difference because even if someone came into the room when I was just sitting with Digger, he would poop or get upset just seeing that person. And I think so that was like something I learned really firsthand from him. Was Cyclura are a lot more intelligent than like people give them credit for, and they also like remember things a lot more. Because I feel like a lot of people, I mean, like certain species, yeah, they don't remember as much and like stuff doesn't affect them. But I feel like people will do that across the board, like being like a cyclurus, like a bearded dragon or a gecko. And it's like they definitely have more going on and more visual, like appearance, like they can see what's going on a lot more than some of these animals for sure.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting. He taught me, I guess, majority of the language of cyclura before I got into, which helped me a lot.
Yeah. So now Rocco, I bet everyone who's here listening or watching has probably seen Rocco on social media. He's been viewed hundreds of millions of times across platforms. So how did Rocco come into your life, and how was it getting him to the point where he is now? Because many people who see Rocco being like this, basically like a dog, a scaly dog, he was not always that way. So take us through the Rocco journey.
So Rocco was part of some like feeding trial and therefore got stunted. So when I adopted him, he was about the size of like a 1-year-old. So
and how old was he at the time?
He was 5.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was insane to see, obviously, because I worked with other like cyclers. So I was just like, he's extremely stunted, but he had like the behavior of a mature iguana. Like he didn't have, because he had the, like that territorial drive, the breeding drive, everything. But I'll say he became more like smooth with it when he got older, like and more and bigger. As he got larger, he definitely was not as impulsive. Like he was much more sporadic with his hormones when he was smaller. And I don't know if that was because he just could throw himself around a lot more or like what the deal was. But he definitely was just, stunted hormonal iguana, and he did not trust people at all. Hands were bad. Any eye contact was bad. Anything like breathing near him was upsetting to him.
Sure.
So it just took me getting a good pair of like welding gloves and patience and tongue. I started with tongue feeding him because like when I would hand feed him stuff with the gloves, he would just bite my hand and shake my hand and stuff. So I was like, this is promoting like a bad behavior. I don't know if it stands true, but in dog training, at least when I worked with aggressive dogs, anytime a dog bites, it gets better at it. So you're basically training a dog to get better every time you let it bite or act on those things when you're not teaching it to like to put it somewhere else. So I wanted to do the same thing with Rocco, because I was like, if I just keep letting him bite me and get away with it essentially and still feed him, I'm rewarding him. Yeah. So I did a step back, did tongue feeding, and then as it got better, I would give him like bigger items and stuff that I could hand feed him. And as you see, like in my videos now, I hand feed him grapes and stuff, but I still have to use caution because they get excited and they want food. But it was a lot of just sitting by his cage, eating like when I got home from work, I sat by his cage, ate dinner, and gave him his salad, and we would eat together. And it was just talking to him, getting him used to me. And then when I had an apartment where he could like move around and do things, I would let him out. And that's when our bond really like solidified, I think, because I think they're just so territorial in their cage that when you let them out, but not only when you let them out on their own condition, I think that just like makes the bond so much better, because when you're like holding them or moving them, you're making them do that action to a degree. Yeah. And I think that was like one of the best things I could do, is just leave his cage open, put his salad down, and then when he had come out, I would hang out with him, and then I would get a high reward treat like a banana or grapes or something, and lure him back to his cage at night. So it was like as hands off as possible. And then it just kind of slowly developed into like I snuck in like a pet here and there, and then he would actually then start climbing up onto my lap and just wanting to like hang out. And then if he accepted me petting him, I just started petting him, and then it kind of just went from there. But it was definitely like learning like to not ever push like that I wanted to hang out with him on him. Yeah, like it was always just letting him come to me like a cat. Basically.
How long would you say it took to get from the point where you were first working with him to the point where he was kind of seeking out this interaction with you?
I would say it was like just under a year, probably like 8 months, I want to say. And don't quote me, I would have to like go through like timestamps, but it wasn't. It was not fast by any like. it was many months of me working with him in his enclosure and letting him kind of walk around and stuff. And like there were moments where he'd spaz out or like bite at me and revert, and you know, but it was just like kind of like giving him that patience and that space to come around. But he did eventually. But I feel like if I would have like forced it early on, like, and had him come out of the cage, like pushed him out of the cage, it wouldn't have gone the way it did. Sure. But it's definitely like you need to be smart about it and be safe, because like when you have a rhino running down onto your arm to like give them treats and stuff, if they are an agitated iguana already, it can bite you, and it can definitely like throw you off guard. And so you just want to be careful about it.
So for anybody who sees your videos, your interactions with Rocco, and that kind of puts the seed of idea in their head to work with rhino iguanas, what would be some things that you would see as like a mistake one could commonly make with raising a rhino iguana that, you know, you figured out over time how to avoid?
I would say, especially with babies, I disagree with like certain breeders on certain things, because like I think that you should give them more height when they're younger, because they do utilize it, and it makes them feel safer when they have more coverage. And I think adults climb as well, but it's just not as much as the young ones. So I feel like keeping that in mind and giving them like as much space as you give them wide, you should give it high. And that's going to help give that animal like security. So like if it doesn't want to come out by you, it can be up top. But if that animal's always at eye level with you, it doesn't make that animal feel safe. Sure. And then the hand feeding and like sitting by the enclosure, especially like when an animal's new, just sitting by the enclosure and hanging out in the area, it's just so important for them to get used to you. I mean, I did that with my my coming eye water monitor as well, because you know, they get weird about a lot of movement in a new place, and if you're constantly like opening the door and messing with them at eye level, I think it's just very intimidating for some of these younger species. They're prey to everything at that size. So when you're coming at them and you're smiling with your big teeth and mouth, they're like, oh, what am I going to get eaten by now?
Exactly. So what are your care parameters for your rhinos, you know, from younger to older, as far as just enclosure size, temperatures, humidity, hydration, feeding? You know, what are your approaches?
So I'll say like when they're younger, I just keep their basking temp like a little bit cooler, just because like the babies will go close to the lights and stuff. And if you're building stuff up, you just want to be like careful about that. But they can handle it pretty hot, like over 100 for my basking temps. And humidity is standard like throughout their entire lives. But I try to keep it around 70% if I can. It's super hard to do here in Texas, obviously.
Here in Texas at the
San
trap.
Diego, right?
It would be hard here too.
If we lived, so it's just one of those things where humidity needs to be pretty constant with them. I try to do like 60 to 80% for my parameters. But 70% like during the day is like ideal, especially when they're like shedding. Because they are from the Caribbean and they do absorb a lot of their humidity like through their skin. So like it's super important for them to have healthy sheds and skin like to do those things. But I feel like, and again, diet and everything, I maybe gave Rocco, when he was like stunted, especially, I gave him like a little bit more protein than I would suggest other people to give. But it wasn't like heavy meat protein or like rats or fuzzy, you know, like it wasn't anything weird like that. I would do like quail eggs here and there, or I would do, he would get snail meat and different fishes or like shrimps. And it wasn't like a lot of it, but it was just like, he got his greens, like a big bowl of greens, but then he got that little bit of protein too. And I did that like probably like 3 times a week when I first got him, just to like give him that growth spurt. And I feel like it did do like wonders, because like ever since then he's just been bulking. And I mean, I don't do it as much anymore. It's probably like once a month they get like a treat like that. But it's definitely helped him grow and fill out as like a male iguana. Because still I get messages, you know, your male iguana is a female. Tell that to his hemipenes.
He certainly is not. I can tell you that much. So enclosure size, you said you think that people need to have taller enclosures for babies. what would you say would be like, okay, I'm buying a rhino iguana, it's 4 months old, I want to get a starter enclosure for it that I can grow into a little bit. What should I be shooting for?
So I would give people two options. I would say like a 36, 18, 36 type deal.
Okay.
Or if you wanted to just have that next step and you could build it up and make sure it's eating and everything, I would just go for the 4x2x4 right away.
Okay.
I just think for building that relationship with that animal, and if you want a rhino iguana and you want to commit to that species, like give it that space, because that then it can stay in there for quite a while and you can build that relationship in a good way, rather than like having to constantly upgrade it and move it and change its scents and everything.
Sure.
So that's another thing too people don't know, and Rocco loves to do this, but he loves to mark and rub his feet on the ground. They scent mark. So when you change that constantly for an animal that is so keen to sense, it can stress them out. So I try to reduce that as much as possible with like cleaning their poop and everything, obviously, but like changing their decor and doing like thorough cleanings. I wouldn't do it for a species like that, because it's so important to know its smells and its surroundings. Yeah.
And then what about, so you said basking temperature, like a little over 100 degrees?
Yeah, so like Rocco and Rockette right now, they get about like 110, 115.
Okay.
But then when he was smaller, it was usually about 100, because he was so close. Like, and he can get closer to the light than I want. Yeah. Because that's another thing about iguanas. As smart as they are, they it's not their fault. They can't feel it, but they're notorious for burning themselves because they just don't feel the heat. So it's your responsibility as a keeper to make sure they can't, touch it with their head and stuff. Yeah. Because they'll do it.
For sure. So then with that type of basking temperature, what's kind of the ambient air temperature throughout the rest of the enclosure?
I would say it's usually around like 80s. And then at night, I always let it drop to like 70s or even a little bit lower. Okay. I think the cooling period, like for thermoregulation at night, is so important for reptiles. So like none of my animals have heat at night, because I think that's the best way to digest, is to cool down and then hit that heat in the morning, because that's what they do in the wild. So
it is.
So I think if you can replicate that to a degree, it just helps them do better as well.
So pretty much just kind of based on that basking spot and then just room temperature, it fluctuates accordingly to how you'd want it to.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just definitely, I will say, like if you do a rhino iguana, get a PVC. There's really no other way to do it, especially because they pee and they poop raw, and it'll go through like wiring cages. And if you keep them outside, it's different. Yeah. But a PVC enclosure is just going to be ideal for keeping humidity and heat and everything that iguana needs fully. Because it is dang near impossible with any other style enclosure. Like I said, the only baby, like the 1836, like from Exoterra, like a glass tank like that, I would use. But only temporarily. Like I would try to go to PVC as soon as possible when it's older, especially.
Then how about adults? So like for one individual adult rhino iguana, if someone were to have it as a pet,
I would say like at least be able to do like a 6x6, like minimum, like bare minimum.
Six wide, 6 deep.
Yeah. Okay. And then even if you can do 6 tall, like all around, like a big box like that would be good. Otherwise, if you could do like an 8x4x4, like if that's what fits in your reptile room, that can work pretty well too for an adult, because they don't climb as much. But ideally, like for me, I would like to do like an 8x10x10 almost, or so 10x8x10, just to give them more room. I mean, they use it. They use every inch that you give them. And I keep praying with Rocco, the more space I give him, the less he'll want to terrorize the house.
I don't think anything can stop him from that.
But I think giving him the most space is possible, but I feel like majority of keepers are keeping adults in like an 8x4x4, and that's, reasonable.
Sure. Okay.
And amongst letting them out, I think it's always important to give animals enrichment and let them out, like those bigger lizards.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. It seems like, big iguanas, big monitor lizards, they're cognitively speaking, they're on the very high end of the spectrum with reptiles. I think the only other reptiles you can really compare would be crocodilians. So yeah, definitely permitting that animal can be tolerated that way.
Yeah.
A lot of monitors and probably a lot of iguanas wouldn't fall into that category.
Yeah.
Definitely a very good thing if, in doses.
Yeah, I think working with him too and getting him adjusted to it, like at a young age, if you do get him at a young age, is super important. And
Yeah.
then kind of, like I said, like giving him more space, like at a time. Like Rocco, I let him out of his enclosure and let him kind of like learn his space and stuff. And I think that gave him so much more confidence in like being an iguana.
Yeah.
I think when they're just scared of everything all the time, they don't get new scents or new enrichment or anything. They're always on edge,
Yeah.
which would make sense for something
For
that's
sure.
stuck in the same four walls all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the other species that I feel like you are most well known for are your Mexican indigo snakes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those. How did you get into your Mexican indigos?
So that again was at the pet store. We ended up having like an unfortunate thing happen with one, and it got rot all over its body.
Okay.
So when I got back from a vacation, I, took a look at it, saw what I could do, and I said like if I was gonna rehab it, had to bring it home because it just needed like constant care for the amount of damage that had already occurred. So I brought him home and nursed him back to health. It took him 8 months to eat his first meal and about a year before all of his wounds healed.
Oh my gosh.
And so, I still have him to this day. He's one of my sires. He sired 2 clutches. So it's been cool to see him grow, but just seeing how smart he was, he used to like bite me like crazy when I mean, rightfully so, he was in pain.
Yeah.
But it kind of went from him being like weird to like defensive to understanding what I was doing.
Yeah.
And that was where I was just like happy to like see a snake like have like cognitive like ability to like
Sure.
see what's going on and to just like understand to a degree like what was going on. And I mean, that's not trying to project my like own feelings onto it or anything. And I know he doesn't love me by any means, but I think he had that understanding of like I was doing something that was helping him and
Sure.
he was feeling better.
Yeah.
So he started to he literally would just sit there and watch me when I did his treatments. And I think he bit me like the first week. And then once he realized what I was doing, he got used to that routine and he knew what I was doing. And I thought that was really cool. So then once he started eating and doing his indigo things and being a little powerhouse, it made me develop a love for the species even more.
Okay.
And that's when Dan and I decided to get a few more, and I ended up with 5 adult breeders over time. And I bred 3 clutches. I obviously have been on hold since moving, but I've only been working with them for about 5 years now, almost 6 years.
Okay, cool.
So I mean, I feel like that's pretty successful for getting the
compared to
adults
most
going.
people, for sure. Yeah.
So I want to definitely hit my momentum with breeding them even more. It's just they were definitely like a species that was different than like other snakes that I just felt like it was the closest to working with an elapid.
Okay.
Without having to work with venomous. Just based off of like their visual and how they consumed other snakes and just the way they acted. It was just very inquisitive and alert, and they definitely are aware of who keeps them. And like I know my snakes, I think it's funny they have stranger danger, but they definitely like are not as cooperative when there's other people like holding them and doing things as they are, because they're just used to me going in there and doing the things, and I don't mess with them. So when they get put in a situation and it's something different, they definitely react accordingly, which I don't blame them. But I think a big thing about all of my indigos is like I rescued a portion of them in the sense of like I got them from breeders at different expos and stuff when I would travel, and like 2 of my breeders, they were loaded with parasites from facilities and like kept on Aspen, and just had like one had a scratched eye from like damage. So I had to take them to the vet, and that's when I learned ivermectin was like not safe for indigos. I had an indigo seize, and she ended up living through that. I had to like flush her system out and like get everything out, and it was a lot.
Brutal.
But I think again it made me have a whole new appreciation for how resilient these animals are.
Yeah.
And how they could trust me and let me work with them, even though like they had been mistreated or gone through the situations that they had gone through. But having like my one snake with parasites almost die on me to like being a mom, like that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's awesome considering that snake in thousands of other cases throughout the history of herpetoculture just wouldn't have made it. It would have maybe been hopefully cobra food, or if not, just in a freezer somewhere. So that's really awesome to you know, and it gives hope too that, you know, obviously with the right amount of persistence and work, that you can turn an animal around that seemingly is too far gone to recover.
Yeah, and I mean, even with some of my babies, because indigos, like, for some reason, they can hatch out with, like, heart conditions sometimes, and, like, they just aren't strong out of the egg. And to sometimes, like, work against, like, the faulty, like, maybe they didn't absorb enough or whatever happens along the lines, like, being persistent and being on and doing many small meals and pushing through that. You can sometimes get like some of the most resilient snakes, and I don't agree with doing it always. Obviously, for certain special cases and different like medical reasons, like kinks and stuff like that, I don't condone any of that. I think that it shouldn't be a breeder, and you should, in a sense, save room for snakes that are genetically right. Sure. Because that's going to give a keeper a better experience too.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just my personal experience of what I've worked with, because I used to rescue all the misfits and do everything that I could to save things.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, it's just so important for reptiles as a whole to highlight, you know, strong genetic, you know, like these powerhouse animals. For sure. But it's also within reasoning. Like if an animal isn't showing anything where it's like, this is significantly bad, push that snake.
Yeah, sure.
Make that snake eat. Make that baby eat. I'm an Italian grandma. Like, I'm going to feed that baby. Uncle Mike knows.
So, husbandry-wise, you know, these are snakes that a lot of people are very interested in for good reason. What's your approach to your husbandry with your indigo snakes overall, just, you know, parameters-wise, and then I guess from like a hatchling to adult stage?
I generally keep them around the same, the babies and the adults. And I'm a huge person of like keeping them on substrate right away and everything like that, because rubidists they like humid pockets and stuff, so it's important to make sure that they're hydrated that way. And I will say I struggled here and there with basking parameters. So what I have found personally to keep my adults at is around 86 to 88 degrees.
Basking or ambient?
Basking.
Okay.
When it is over that, they tend to rub their faces and their noses because they're overheating. It's almost like it drives them like neurologically like crazy. Like, and they're just like, I need to get out of here.
Sure.
And when I did research on indigos, like they can cover up, I think it's like 3 to 5 miles within their habitat. Like they cruise. So like to think of an animal like being in an enclosure and not being able to get away from something when it's overheating, like I would freak out probably too.
Yeah.
So that was something I learned, trying never to go over 90. And if you do, you'll see them all at the front. Like an indigo is a great animal to have, like if you do have thermostats and stuff, because it'll tell you when something is not working right.
Fair enough.
But I would just say, again, I learned along the way, like humidity is super crucial with them for like good sheds in their eyeballs and everything, because they've got big bulbous eyes and pretty, you know, prominent nose structure. So that stuff can get stuck if you're not paying attention to that. And then they have very like keeled scales almost under their chin. So like making sure like it's humid enough during the point of shedding to have proper sheds is super important for them. Yeah. Their eyes are everything for them.
Definitely.
So keeping them safe is very important. And then giving them arboreal space as well as like burrows. Because you do see, you know, indigos utilize gopher burrows, eastern indigos. And I'm sure Mexican indigos utilize gopher or tortoises dens within Mexico as well. Yeah.
Uncle Mike says dry mark on like varanids without legs. Definitely some wisdom there.
Varanids are snakes in 4-wheel drive, I say. But yeah, Drymarchon, I think I just like the pinnacle. If I was going to start with anything else, I think it would be a Pituophis. But I think Drymarchon are just like the Cadillac, like Big Daddy snake of the reptile world. Like you just can't beat it.
They're
It's
pretty
just,
damn cool.
it's a prominent snake. Their eyeliner is always on fleek. Like you can't beat it.
Yep. So one thing that often causes people issues with indigo snakes in either direction is the diet and the feeding.
Yeah.
What's your approach to feeding your indigos from all stages of life?
So all stages of life, like I do small meals and more consistently if I
Okay.
can. During breeding season, it's about every 3 to 5 days, but it's smaller meals. So it's like mice, small quail, chicks, like just different little things like that. I used to feed them frog legs,
Okay.
quail eggs. They eat capelin. I had one female eat snail meat one time. You've seen the boys, they like other snakes. So they've had boas before.
Yeah.
They've gotten a ball python before. So I try to keep a varied diet, and I feel like that's been my greatest success with breeding. And I'm excited to see like how we do this year with like the diet we've been feeding like their feeders. Just to see if it makes like a difference at all.
Sure.
But I think lean meals more consistently, but keeping that body weight on them for like season is just like the ideal. But they're not a fat snake.
Right.
So like you see a lot of indigos and they're just thick and like it's cool, but that's a fat indigo.
Yeah.
And when you see them in the wild, like they still have a waistline and stuff. And we kind of supersize, Americanize them to a degree. So I feel like if we can feed them a varied diet, and I think that's why Reptilinks is an awesome choice for giving them just like a variety.
Sure.
I think that would be, that's the ideal way to keep an indigo. And I try not to be that person that's like, well, don't get that snake if you're not going to give it variety. But that is an animal where it's like,
Sure.
if you're not going to give it a varied diet, please don't get it. Because to feed that animal rodents its whole life, it's not fair.
And then if that is, let's say even a primary diet, being rodents, you can't feed rodents the same way you'd feed frog legs or, whatever else, these lean items.
There's no way I'm feeding a rat every 3 to 5 days.
The caloric density of these items is what you need to look at as opposed to just how big they are. I mean,
and how active the animal is too.
Yeah.
Like if the animal's not active and if my animal is not swinging out of the enclosure because it's that excited for food, it's not getting fed that day.
Sure.
Unless it's like this animal hasn't eaten in a long time and I'm going to make sure it eats. But within reasoning, if my animal is not excited to eat, it's not eating that day.
Yeah.
And that's just how it goes because there's no reason to feed an animal if it's not hungry.
Yeah.
Right. You're just feeding something to feed it.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a captive reptile that isn't looking for food,
he's good.
Yeah. You've fed it enough. It's doing just fine because that animal's instinct should immediately be to look around for whatever's coming at it. So you have been successful multiple times with breeding, which is something that not many people can say with that species. What has been your approach so far that has brought you that success with your indigo breeding?
I would say the varied diet and cycling them where I cooled them down a little bit in the winter for about 2 months.
Okay.
I kept them under, the 80s. Like it wasn't like super cool. I feel like the coldest my room ever got at night was like 64, 65.
Okay.
But it wasn't like anywhere near like the daytime temps, like in the 80s. Like I said, it was never over that. So it wasn't fully brumation like other breeders do, but it was still like enough, I feel like, to cool them down. And then as soon as season hit, I started spraying them a lot more and then feeding them a lot more.
Okay.
And then indigos are combative in the wild. So when my male decided to slack off, that's when I ended up finding another male, getting that male shed, putting it in my mister, shaking it up, and spraying the enclosure with his shed scent, and it made the male go absolutely nuts, and the female then showed interest as well. Because indigos it's actually really cool. Females, they really like when a male is like assertive and knows what he's doing. And if they notice at all that the male is like unsure of himself, like they'll throw him around a little bit. So it's pretty cool to see them test each other, I guess, that way.
Sure.
So keeping them fed, though, is super important because they do have a high feeding drive. So you don't want them biting at each other. You don't want the female coming out thinking that the male is food. Because like that can happen if you don't do that. but keeping them on a lean diet so they can persevere through the season is like important, I think, because it gives them stamina. When you feed them just like a bunch of rodents, like I'll feed my females like more like smaller rats and like mice when they're pregnant or like or when they are breeding, I should say, because they need like that extraness before they lay their eggs and stop eating and do all the stuff that they need to do. But I would say like, yeah, keeping them in shape while they're breeding and not getting too thick has always been my best success. Whenever I've had a female that is in my in my eyes overweight, she does not want to take. I just feel like she's good. Like, and I don't know if that has to do with being a little bit on the heavier side or stuff, but I just know obese animals in general, they don't have the energy of animals that are in shape.
Sure. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense, especially with an animal like an indigo snake. So,
but they need food and humidity, like any other species, to be like, hey, it's breeding season. And frog legs really kicks it in for them because where they're from in the wild, that's what kicks off their breeding season is the rain that then causes the frogs to breed, and then that kicks them out of their holes. So if you have frog legs or any of that scenting, that's going to get your indigos knowing that it's time. And I think, a big portion of with us moving and everything going on besides the stress, I think that was my biggest like letdown that could have maybe saved it.
Sure.
But yeah, that's my trick for everyone. I shouldn't give all my secrets, but I think frogs definitely will kick indigos into being like, this is time to do some stuff.
Yeah. So one thing that I feel like scares people away from Drymarchon, in general, you alluded to it, is their I don't want to say propensity, but they're notorious for being cannibalistic.
Yeah.
What do you do in your breeding strategy to prevent that from being what kicks into that primarily female's mind upon seeing the male? What do you do so where she's ready for breeding as opposed to ready for a meal?
So I feel like I always feed her. I think it's probably like 2-3 days at least before the male is introduced. And I make sure she's got a good meal in her. Yeah. And then she's gone to the bathroom at least once before he's been in here. And that seems to do like the best for them. Because like, again, if you give them a huge meal and then throw the male in, like she doesn't want anything to do with him. Like she's just going to be digesting and doing her own thing. Sure. And then the male is going to annoy the heck out of her. So they're just going to already have a bad association. Yeah. And like any of the times where I've thrown them together too soon, they're just sitting on opposite ends until she figures out what she wants to do. Yeah. I would say a huge thing is indigos are not stupid. So like you get them used to you going in the enclosure and messing around and stuff. So if you do a little bit of tapping and get them used to like, this is a presence of something else besides food, then she's just not going to come out swinging either. Sure. And then a big thing I do is I don't feed them other indigos. I also think that'd be kind of like weird, but I think if they did get the taste for it, essentially, that there could be a mishap. But I will say, like, I've had an experience where I was feeding a breeding pair in the same enclosure. The female decided to freak out for some every reason, just because there's freak accidents all the time. And she had a rat. She dropped it and ran over and threw herself at the male, even though he didn't even have food yet. And then he saw the food on the tongs outside of the cage. So he went forward and grabbed her. So he had her head like halfway down, and then I grabbed him behind the head and pulled her out. But even to this day, he's never, like tried to eat another snake. Yeah. So like, I'm not too concerned. Like he got a taste for it. Like they're smart. Sure. I think they're definitely smart. But I think if one was like not ready to breed, or if there was some sort of like, we're not vibing, then that might happen.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like across the board, but also with indigos, if there is a cannibalism event, it's 99%, if not 100% of the time, the female eating the male.
Yeah, males, I haven't heard of them cannibalizing, but they will chew females up during breeding and stuff. So there's definitely possibilities for that. But yeah, females, it's usually females get
is that just aggressive breeding behavior as opposed to cannibalism?
Yeah, so males, I mean, like you'll see it with like king snakes and stuff. They'll grab the females behind the neck, but indigos, they just have a wicked bite on them. And anyone, if you've ever been chewed on by an indigo, like it's not a great feeling. So imagine that to another snake, like it's just not gonna it's just not going to be a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Good night, Mike.
Good night. For anybody who is interested in indigo snakes in general, but I guess we can specifically talk about Mexican indigos. What do you think are some of the ways that one would prepare themselves for the undertaking of one of those snakes?
Don't have a lot of other animals unless you are like prepared to keep up with like the fast digestive tract and how much, you know, they poop, because they do poop a lot. And then if you're not prepared to give them a high enclosure, I would also say like kind of move away from it, because whenever I've kept mine in under 2 feet tall, they'll poop on the ceilings, and that's not fun to clean up.
Oh,
so they definitely like height so they can get away from stuff, and they have like little fits if they can't. So giving them as much space as possible is really ideal. And I understand racks are needed for purposes, and I do raise my babies in like clear tub racks, but don't get an indigo if you're going to keep it in a rack system, because that's an animal that is so visual and so interactive that you want to have that animal out and being able to interact. You're going to have a better interaction with the animal too. They get more agitated when they don't have stimulation. And I've just found them to do a lot better when they're not shoved in a smaller spot. And then, because the only time then you open it is usually to feed them or to give them something. So they're just always going to be in food mode. And like I said, it's just not going to be that good interaction you can get from them when you have them in like enclosures.
Cool. So we're kind of wrapping up here. We definitely got to go grab some dinner here soon with MJ. I know he's getting hungry, but to kind of wrap everything up, what are some of your, I guess, short and long-term goals that, you know, now with everything you've done within the industry, you know, professionally and personally, what are some of your goals going forward? And I guess we'll start with that. What are some of your goals?
I think some of my goals is still like perfecting my collection to the degree like I have like the species I'm breeding and working with that I like, but I'm also having like my pets now. I really want to get like my big 3, which is the black-headed python, the Boland's python, and then another female southern white-lipped python in the future. I think those, like, to have those animals and be able to give them the exhibits that they want, that's my goal. Because I just think that's what's really cool. I do want to breed Cyclura, and I'll always breed my Urodactylotes and my indigos. I would like to get as many clutches of indigos as I can in the future. But I've been working with some really high reds in mine, and I am very excited for what the future holds. Because they're fire red, and it's been a privilege to have like my adults produce like some of the nicest indigos I've ever seen in my life.
I mean, and you know, I'm not just going to say this, but I genuinely believe that your indigos are the best I've at least seen in the country. I mean, there's probably some in the wild in Mexico that have more red on them, but I haven't seen them. So for anyone who is looking for the highest end red phase Mexican indigos, this is who you should check out. You kind of answered my second question of what are some of your dream species to add. If there's anyone else to throw out there besides those 3 you named.
I would really like to work with the Yucatan black-tailed Cribos, and then possibly, if not breed, but just own an Exanthic. I like Drymarchon. So and then of course I want an Eastern. But as far as like breeding goes, like unless I had more space, I'm not going to do it because they take up a lot of space. And they need, you know, breeding projects require a lot of space and a lot of time. And I've been able to enjoy my animals more the less I've bred. And I think for me to have that balance of breeding still, but also tapering back, it's super important for me to like have my longevity as a keeper. Yeah,
that's a great mindset to have. I feel like a lot of people can burn themselves out by going balls to the wall really quickly, getting in over their heads, and then growing to, you know, have kind of a resentment towards the whole process because they did it wrong. So you know,
but
definitely
then when you like breed stuff, like I bred my Sonoran boas and traded those for an Argentine boa, which has been like a bucket list, you know, boa for me. And so like doing stuff like that too is just like it means a lot. And
for sure.
To like put so much work into a project and then have it fulfill something like that, I think is also something that's really cool to try, at least in the hobby, at least.
Absolutely.
Because you learn a lot for sure.
Absolutely. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
So for everybody out there who does not already follow you on social media, which I would assume is probably none of you, but for those who are unaware, where can they find you? Where can they contact you about available animals, whether it's indigo snakes or chameleon geckos or sonora boas? How does one find you on the interwebs?
The best way to find me is Instagram, and that's Bo Lizard on Instagram. And I also have a Facebook, which is open. I post the Rocco videos and stuff on there, so you can message me on there. I'm just not going to be as responsive as Instagram, but if you message me on Instagram, I'll definitely get back to you right away. Please don't message me on TikTok because I am horrible at TikTok. But even if you message me on YouTube, I will respond to that as well. But yeah, that's probably the best way is Instagram.
All right, cool. And for me, as always, you can find me on Instagram at Scrub Shepherd and Stephen Kush on Facebook. I do my best to respond to as many messages as I can. And then for us here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, please give us a subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe. Like and share it, all that good stuff. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the audio networks. There's a new podcast every single day here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network. So there is never a shortage of the highest end reptile related content you can find. Kush'S Korner is here every Wednesday live and also on all of these streaming platforms. So we'll say, everyone have a good evening. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see everyone back here next week.